Have you ever made a mistake? A really big one? Maybe you broke your mom's favorite vase or said something hurtful to a friend. We all make mistakes, but today I want to tell you a story about what might be the biggest, most heartbreaking mistake ever made in the history of the world. It's a story from long, long ago about a man named Judas Iscariot. Imagine a time 2,000 years ago in a land with dusty roads and small, bustling towns. Jesus was traveling from village to village, and he was unlike anyone people had ever met. He told amazing stories called parables that made people think deeply about kindness, love, and God. He performed incredible miracles, helping people who couldn't see to see again, and people who couldn't walk to get up and dance. Crowds followed him everywhere, eager to hear his words and feel his gentle, loving presence. To help him with his important work, Jesus chose 12 special friends to be his closest followers. These 12 men were called the disciples. They came from all different logs of life. Some were fishermen, like Peter and Andrew. Another was a tax collector, Matthew. And among them was a man named Judas Iscariot. Judas was part of this inner circle. He walked with Jesus every single day. He ate with him, listened to his teachings, and saw the miracles firsthand. He probably laughed with Jesus and the other disciples around a campfire at night. He was there when Jesus fed 5,000 people with just a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. He saw Jesus calm a raging storm with just a word. He was a trusted friend, so trusted, in fact, that he was put in charge of the group's money bag. He was right there at the center of the most amazing things happening in the world. But somewhere along the way, something in Judas's heart started to change. A dark seed of greed and disappointment began to grow. Maybe Judas thought Jesus was going to become a powerful earthly king, one who would defeat their enemies and make them all rich and famous. When Jesus kept talking about a different kind of kingdom, a kingdom of love and forgiveness in people's hearts, perhaps Judas felt let down. He was in charge of the money, and the Bible tells us he sometimes took some for himself. This love of money started to twist his thinking. It became more important to him than his friendship with Jesus. At this time, there were some powerful leaders who didn't like Jesus at all. They were jealous of how much the people loved him, and they were angry because Jesus challenged their rules and their authority. They saw him as a threat, and they wanted to get rid of him. The only problem was, Jesus was always surrounded by huge crowds. They needed to find a way to arrest him quietly, away from his followers. They needed someone on the inside, someone who knew Jesus's routines, someone who could lead them to him when he was alone. And that's when Judas made his terrible choice. He secretly went to these powerful leaders. "What will you give me," he asked, "if I deliver him to you?" His heart had grown so cold that he was willing to trade his friend for money. They offered him 30 pieces of silver. In today's money, that wouldn't be very much at all. Maybe a few $100s. For this small amount, Judas agreed to betray Jesus. He agreed to lead the soldiers to his friend. The night it all happened was a special night. It was the Passover, a time for a celebratory meal. Jesus gathered his 12 disciples in an upstairs room for one last dinner together. The atmosphere should have been warm and full of friendship. But Jesus knew what was about to happen. He knew about the darkness in Judas's heart. As they were eating, Jesus looked at his friends and said something that shocked them all. "Truly, I tell you, "One of you will betray me." The disciples were horrified. One by one, they started asking, "Surely you don't mean me, Lord?" They couldn't imagine any of them doing such a thing. Imagine sitting at a table with your best friends and hearing that one of them was about to turn against you. Then, Judas, the one who had already made the deal, asked the same question, maybe trying to pretend he was innocent. "Surely you don't mean me?" he asked. And Jesus replied softly, "You have said so." Jesus then gave Judas a piece of bread, a sign of friendship, but also a final chance. But Judas's heart was set. He took the bread and immediately went out into the night. And the Bible says, "And it was night." It wasn't just dark outside. A deep darkness had fallen over Judas's soul. After the dinner, Jesus went with his remaining disciples to a quiet garden called Gethsemane to pray. He was deeply sad, knowing what was coming. He asked his friends to stay awake with him, but they were tired and kept falling asleep. While he was praying, the sound of marching feet and clanking armor broke the silence. A crowd of soldiers and officials carrying torches and weapons appeared through the trees, and leading them, walking right at the front, was Judas. He had told the soldiers, "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." It was a secret signal. A kiss is supposed to be a sign of love, of friendship, of greeting. But Judas used this beautiful sign for the most ugly purpose. He walked right up to Jesus. "Greetings, Rabbi," he said, and he kissed him. Jesus looked at him, not with anger, but with a deep sadness. "Judas," he said, "are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" In that moment, the soldiers seized Jesus and arrested him. The other disciples, scared and confused, ran away into the darkness. The betrayal was complete. What Judas did led to Jesus being put on trial and eventually crucified. But what happened to Judas? Did he enjoy his 30 pieces of silver? No. As soon as he saw that Jesus had been condemned, a terrible feeling washed over him. He was filled with remorse, a deep, agonizing regret. He finally understood the horrible thing he had done. He had betrayed not just a friend, but the most loving and perfect person who ever lived. He ran back to the leaders he had made the deal with, throwing the 30 silver coins on the floor of the temple. "I have sinned," he cried out, "for I have betrayed innocent blood." But the leaders just shrugged. "What is that to us?" they said coldly. "That's your problem." They didn't care about his guilt. They had what they wanted. Judas was completely alone. He had lost his friends, he had lost his teacher, and he had lost himself to his guilt and despair. The weight of his mistake was too much for him to bear. Instead of turning back to God and asking for forgiveness, the very forgiveness that Jesus taught so much about, Judas went away, and in his deep despair, he ended his own life. It was the tragic end to a tragic story. He made the greatest mistake, and he couldn't see a way out. This story is incredibly sad, isn't it? It shows us how a little bit of greed and disappointment can grow into something monstrous if we let it. Judas had every opportunity. He walked with Jesus, he heard the truth every day, but he let darkness into his heart, and it destroyed him. But here's the most important part of the story. Even after Judas's terrible betrayal, Jesus' story doesn't end in that garden or on that cross. 3 days later, the most amazing miracle of all happened. Jesus came back to life. His resurrection showed that even the worst mistake, the biggest act of betrayal, the darkest moment in history, could not defeat God's love and his ultimate plan. The story of Judas is a powerful warning for all of us. It teaches us to guard our hearts against greed and jealousy. It reminds us that our choices, even small ones, have big consequences. But it also points us to an even greater truth. While Judas made the biggest mistake, Jesus offered the greatest gift: forgiveness. Even when Peter, another disciple, denied knowing Jesus 3 times, he was filled with regret, but he turned back to Jesus and was forgiven and restored. If you ever feel like you've made a big mistake, remember this story. Don't be like Judas, who ran away into despair. Be like Peter. Remember that there is always a path back. No mistake is too big for forgiveness. Jesus' love is bigger than our biggest mistakes. We can always turn back to God, say we're sorry, and ask for a fresh start. That is the incredible hope that comes from this very sad story. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this story gives you something to think about. If you enjoyed it, please support this channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video. Until next time, bye!